here are all the muntin sections. I made a few extra, all ready to be jointed and assembled into the window frames. On these door frames, the muntins have to be mortised into the frames. So here's a muntin cut with a T. It's going to have to be trimmed so that it will fit into the mortise that I have to cut. So the first thing is to mark where these mortises have to be, and on one of these pieces I will mark the 3/8 inch dimension, and then in groups of 4 that I can manage, I will make sure my pieces are all registered the same, lined up the same, and then just use a fine pencil to make my lines. And now I know the width of the mortise. To mark the depth, I'll use the marking gauge, and I'll just do one here to give you an idea. Just go ahead and make a mark, and there it is. And I'll cut the mortises now before I do rabbiting for the glass, and that way I'm working on a nice level surface. Now, with all 4 sides of the mortise marked, I'm going to use a 3/8 inch drill to drill out the waste to a 1/2 inch depth. That makes it a whole lot easier to use a chisel to get rid of the extra waste and make the corners square. Just a 3/8 inch square mortise goes a 1/2 inch deep. And I'll just use a 3/8 inch mortising chisel to try to clean up the bottom. I'm using the router table to cut the rabbet in the rails and stiles for the glass to fit into. So I'm using a 1/2 inch straight bit here, which will give me a tight radius so that I can get most of the material removed, and the chisel work will be very minimal. This is a sample that I've cut to make sure I got my dimensions correctly, and you can see how that works out. It's the same rabbet that I have on the muntins. Now I have to do the joinery on the muntins. So I've set up a dado set here to be a little over a 1/2 inch wide because my depth of mortise is a 1/2 inch. And I put a little stop block on here, and I've set up for the first cut. Now you may be able to see on this muntin, here's the top, so I'm just cutting off a 1/2 inch of this 1/4 inch thick piece here. And when we're done with that, then I'll reset the set to be able to cut an 1/8 inch off the back, but 3/16 inch shy of the 1/2 inch, so that we'll fit into the completed frame piece the right way. I've cut the top and the bottom of the muntin and did a test fit. Now I need to machine where the muntins are going to cross. Okay, so the first cut I'm going to do is this cut. I've done on a waste piece, where I cut out a place on the rail muntins that will fit over the 3/8 inch wide piece on the stiles muntin. Try to do as much finishing as I can before assembly. I'm just using the regular 1 pound cut shellac. That's 1 pound of flakes per gallon of denatured alcohol. Wiping it on carefully. And I'll do several coats of this until it feels right. Now I'm gluing together the muntin pieces, and I've been very careful to keep track of where these pieces go, so I'm doing sides right now. Flat face clamps will bring the pieces together to give me a nice coplanar joint. I've got some nice solid brass hinges. These are nice extruded hinges. They're really nice. And I need to mortise them into the door parts. So I think it's easier to do this mortising before I assemble the doors, because I can clamp all this work down. I can do all 4 door edges at the same time. So I've set my 1/4 inch router here for the depth of a hinge leaf plus a little bit. Gives me a little bit I can plane away later. And I've marked my where that has to be. I've got a square guide set up. And I'll just go ahead and I'll cut both sides nice and square, and then I can freehand out the inside. Just rough that out, get rid of most of that material. When you're routing against a fence like this, keep in mind the direction of rotation of the bit. I want the bit to force the router towards the fence so that it doesn't climb away and into my good material. Now I'm drilling holes in the stile that has the lock in it, and this is the hole for the key to go through. Here's a better look at the way this lock fits in. I've mortised it into the back of the stile, and you can see the place for the key. So now it's time to glue the muntins and the rails, or the stiles, together. I try to break up my gluing into small bite-sized pieces. So go ahead and glue the mortises. Just use a little Type-On 3 with an acid brush. And then gently fit the parts together. Just tap them home. And then set up for the other side. And just using a K-body clamp on each muntin joint, just snug it up. Okay, now just check the diagonals, make sure that we're square. There's a considerable amount of glass that's going to go into these cabinets, and what we settled on was double strength, non-tempered glass. It's 1/8 inch thick. I've made a lot of wooden strips here out of the oak. They're 3/16 inch by about 5/16 inch, designed to fit on top of the double strength glass, which is 1/8 inch, and come up practically flush with the inside of the muntins. So each of these strips is going to be cut to length. I've made a little jig here to give me a 0 clearance cut here to eliminate tear out, and also a stop block to get these all to the right length. To attach these strips to the muntins, I'm using these little number 3 1/2 inch long brass slotted screws. So I'm cutting a countersunk hole in the piece so that the screw head lies flush, and to make sure that a screw coming in from one side of the muntin doesn't hit a screw that I already put in on the other side of the muntin. And then I've offset the holes a little bit so that they don't interfere with each other. I've set up some stop blocks on here. I'm using a bit that has a countersink attached to it, so it's a one-step process that I can get through. You know, there's what, 320 of these to do. So I use a I use a little form here, just a piece of plywood that is the same thickness as a piece of glass, actually just slightly more. I shim it up with some blue tape, and that way when I set the keepers I don't have to be using a real piece of glass that I might break, and I can do this over and over again. Later on when it comes time to install the glass, it's a pretty simple matter of just unscrewing the keepers, put the glass in, screw the keepers back on. So I just take my pre-made keepers with the holes drilled in them, making sure that I keep the bottom up against the glass. Get them all nice in place, and then I'll mark the holes for them. What I do is I just push the keepers down nice and tight, and then I take a little center punch and simply make a little mark, and then I'll pull the keepers out, keeping them in the correct orientation, because remember, these are custom fit now. And I'll take my little felt tip marker. Let's go ahead and pull this out. Put my little felt tip marker and make a little dot where each of the holes are, where each of the marks are. Then I take my drill. I've marked the depth with a piece of tape. Okay, now since I've already tested 2 of these pieces of glass to make sure the glass fit right, I'm not going to worry about putting a piece of glass in for the rest of these. And I'm just putting them in place here so that I don't lose them, because I'm going to be doing, what do I got, 8 of these frames all together. Okay, this is one of the sides fully assembled with all the keepers. There's no glass in here, but this is ready to be installed, and I'll give you a little close-up here so you can just see how these keepers all fit.